The lights were blinding, the room was full, and the tension? Electric. It was supposed to be a standard town hall event, moderated, orderly, scripted to the last syllable. California Governor Gavin Newsom entered the stage with the easy confidence of a man used to applause. His polished navy suit, perfect smile, and calm cadence felt built for television. And that's exactly where the cameras were rolling. Then Karoline Leavitt walked in. Young, sharp-eyed, and unapologetically intense, she didn't enter like a guest. She entered like a challenger. No teleprompter, no pre-written lines, just fire behind her eyes and facts in her fists. The audience shifted in their seats. Something about her presence made people sit up straighter. Newsom extended a hand. She ignored it. He smirked. Still angry, Karoline? She leaned into the mic, still condescending, Gavin? The crowd tensed. The moderator opened his mouth to calm the tone, but it was already too late. This wasn't going to be a polite debate. This was a reckoning. Within minutes, Newsom brought up her recent policy critique, her viral takedown of his education bill. But instead of countering with logic, he leaned into mockery. She's not here to discuss, he said, gesturing casually toward her. She's here to fight. That's what she does. It's savage. Gasps echoed. Someone in the crowd murmured, did he just? Karoline didn't flinch. Her eyes locked on him. You think calling me a savage weakens me? Her voice was low but sharp enough to cut steel. Try leading with integrity for once instead of dry-cleaned cowardice. Newsom raised a brow. She stepped closer. You wear your suit like armor. I wear my scars like proof. And that's when the crowd lost it. This wasn't a town hall anymore. It was a war of voices, pride, and power. And the first shot had just been fired. The moderator tried to reel it back. Let's keep this civil, he pleaded, his voice drowned out by the raucous energy crackling through the hall. The crowd wasn't interested in civility, they were here for fire, and Karoline had just delivered it with steel-tipped precision. Newsom forced a chuckle. You clearly memorized that line. Karoline shot back without hesitation. No, Gavin. I lived that line. A murmur rippled through the audience. This wasn't just a battle of policy, it was a collision of two Americas. He stood for institutions, prestige, and polished control. She was the face of the insurgent right, fiery, direct, and unfiltered. Newsom gestured to the screen behind him, where a chart flashed about California's job growth. This is leadership, he said. You can scream all you want, but data doesn't lie. Karoline didn't even look at the chart. She stared straight at him. You want to impress us with PowerPoints while your state streets are filled with fentanyl and broken families. He tensed, just slightly. You can't govern chaos, Karoline, he said. You can only scream into it. Funny, she said, because you created it. She walked past her podium. You call me a savage, like that word will shame me. Like it's not laced with the arrogance of a man who's never had to fight for a damn thing. He smirked again. I'm trying to educate you. You mean condescend? Silence fell. Then she leaned closer. Let me be very clear, I'd rather be called savage for speaking hard truths than praised for polishing lies in a three-piece suit. The room stirred. In the crowd, people weren't just watching anymore, they were choosing sides. And this wasn't just political anymore, this was personal. And it was far from over. The segment was supposed to end at the 30-minute mark. It was now pushing 52. Producers backstage whispered frantically into headsets, debating whether to cut the feed. But the viewership numbers were exploding. Twitter was on fire. Clips were already trending under #SuitVersusSavage. On stage, Gavin Newsom's smile was beginning to crack. Not publicly, he still held the posture, the rhythm, the charm. But Karoline could see it. And she kept pressing. You call me wild, she said, voice calm, deliberate. But let's talk about your idea of order. Rising homelessness. Failing public schools. Lock down small businesses while your friends dined in Napa Valley. The audience erupted, half in applause, half in outrage. Newsom lifted a hand to calm the noise. I understand the frustration. But governing isn't about shouting matches. It's about accountability, Karoline interrupted. Which you avoid like a straight answer. He turned toward her, fully now. You love fire, Karoline. But do you know what happens when fire burns too long? It consumes itself. She paused, then smiled. Maybe. Or maybe it spreads. The moderator interjected. Let's shift topics. But Gavin wasn't done. You're not here to lead, he snapped. You're here to provoke, to disrupt. You don't want solutions. You want the spotlight. Karoline stepped forward. No. I want consequences. He blinked. I want every elitist in a pressed suit who's failed this country to feel what it's like to be held to their own standards. If that makes me a savage in your world, then maybe your world's the problem. The audience stilled. The silence was louder than the cheers had ever been. This wasn't just theater anymore. This was a line in the sand. And both of them had just crossed it. Backstage staff were panicking. News outlets were cutting in with live commentary. Social media wasn't just trending, it was spiraling. But on stage? Karoline stood grounded, shoulders squared, like the storm belonged to her. Newsom leaned on the podium, smoothing his tie with slow precision. You sound passionate, I'll give you that, he said, with an icy smile. But passion without control? That's a tantrum. Karoline tilted her head. And control without conscience? That's tyranny. The line hit hard. A few in the crowd actually gasped. Newsom stepped away from the podium. You want to play tough? Let's talk policy. You railed against our climate efforts, our criminal justice reform, our health mandates. What would you have done? Let people die? Karoline narrowed her eyes. People did die, locked in their homes, stripped of their businesses, silenced in the name of science that changed every week. He laughed bitterly. You don't get it. Leadership isn't about sound bites and spite. And what about optics and excuses? She shot back. You shut down the state while you dined at the French Laundry. The audience roared. Gavin's smirk twitched. Yeah, we all remember that, Karoline continued. You breaking your own rules while mothers couldn't say goodbye to dying children. He pointed a finger, the first sign of real anger. That's low. You set the bar, Governor, she said. I just refuse to lower myself to it. The air grew sharp. Then Karoline leaned forward, voice now quieter, deadly calm. You see me as a savage because I speak for people your office forgot. Not the lobbyists. Not the influencers. The single moms. The vets. The kids you locked behind screens and mandates. Gavin's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. She smiled, thin and cold. You called me fire. Maybe. But tonight, I burned your script. And just like that, the audience exploded again. She didn't shout. She didn't grandstand. She simply took the room. And this time, Gavin didn't have a single word to give back. The studio lights dimmed slightly for commercial break, but no one moved. Not the moderator, not the audience, not even Gavin Newsom, who stood in the glow of the set, blinking slower now. Backstage, Karoline paced like a fighter between rounds. Her team huddled near the edge, whispering. You just detonated half the room, one staffer muttered. I didn't detonate anything, she replied. I exposed it. A producer appeared, earpiece crackling. Newsom's people want the next segment cut short. Karoline just smirked. Of course they do. Meanwhile, Gavin stared at the screen showing replay highlights from the last exchange. He wasn't used to losing ground, especially not to someone younger, unpolished, and unapologetic. His aide leaned in. "Sir, we can steer it back to policy. Maybe education, or infrastructure." "She's not playing by debate rules," Gavin muttered. "She's weaponizing every wound." Out front, the crowd hadn't quieted. Some were clapping. Others were booing. Everyone had a phone out. The moderator returned from his corner, clearly rattled. "We need to bring it down a notch. There's concern about the tone." Karoline stepped forward again, voice sharp. "If the tone is the problem, maybe the truth hit too hard." Newsom re-entered the conversation, cooler now. "You want to talk about truth? Let's talk about the fact that you've never held statewide office. Never passed legislation. You're a media firecracker." Karoline met his stare. "And yet somehow, I just made you sweat on your own turf." The audience laughed, some uncomfortably, some with glee. This wasn't a policy forum anymore. This was a power shift, televised, shared, viral by the second. And no one knew what was coming in the next segment. But everyone knew one thing. Gavin Newsom had finally met someone who didn't flinch. By the time the next segment aired, the internet was already boiling. #Savage vs. Suit trended globally. Pundits argued live while Karoline and Gavin stood just feet apart, not even glancing at one another during the intro reel. The moderator looked pale. "Let's pivot to national leadership and generational responsibility." Karoline struck first. "National leadership begins with telling the truth, even when it's inconvenient. Even when it's not politically profitable." Newsom gritted his teeth. "And that's coming from someone who's never written a policy beyond a tweet?" She didn't blink. "Sometimes a tweet wakes more people up than a 1,000-page bill no one reads." A gasp rippled. Gavin chuckled dryly. "Ah, the social media generation. Loud, reactive, allergic to nuance." "You mean allergic to hypocrisy," Karoline shot back. "Your version of nuance is silence wrapped in press releases." The crowd exploded. He stepped forward. "You think you're dangerous because you're bold. But you're dangerous because you're reckless." She leaned in. "And you're dangerous because you're comfortable." That stopped him cold. "You've spent so long above the chaos," she continued, "you forgot who lives inside it." Gavin opened his mouth, but didn't speak. The silence stretched. Karoline added, "You call me a fire. But I didn't start this blaze. You lit the match years ago, when you started protecting institutions over individuals." The room was a powder keg. Somewhere backstage, an executive producer whispered, "We've never had this many viewers live." And Karoline? She didn't look triumphant. She looked focused, controlled, as if she had more to say. As if she'd only just begun. And Gavin? He looked, for the first time, like someone unsure of the next move. By now, the air in the studio was thick with tension, and outside, America had picked up its pitchforks. The live broadcast was being rebroadcast on every major network. Twitter was on fire. Clips of Karoline's rebuttals had already been memed, clipped, subtitled, and uploaded. Back in the studio, the moderator gave up trying to steer it. This was no longer a discussion. This was a showdown. Newsom stepped forward, jaw tight. "You think politics is just anger and snark. But I've governed. I've made hard calls. While you..." Karoline interrupted, calm but cutting. "We're dining in Napa while telling working families to sacrifice." A single "oh" came from the back row of the crowd. "You throw words like responsibility around," she continued, "but you don't live them. You perform them." Gavin raised his voice. "At least I didn't build a career off of provoking. You're a fire starter, not a leader." Karoline's voice dropped. "You call it provocation. I call it the sound of a locked door being kicked open." He smirked. "You really think that line will age well?" "I think your silence will age worse," she replied. The moderator finally tried to end it. Let's take a final statement. But Karoline turned directly to Gavin. Do you know why people are tuning in right now? Not because of you. They've heard your type for years. Suits, smirks, slogans. They're watching because they're tired of waiting for someone to finally say it. Gavin snapped, say what, exactly? She faced the camera. That you don't get to shame Americans into silence anymore. The crowd erupted. Gavin exhaled slowly, arms folded, eyes narrowed. It wasn't a political debate anymore. It was a cultural collision. And the world was watching. The show hadn't even ended when the ripple began. On TikTok, users were stitching Karoline's "You don't get to shame Americans into silence anymore" into videos of everyday struggles, gas prices, shuttered businesses, classroom walkouts. On cable news, commentators scrambled to pick a side. Some called her unhinged. Others, unshakable. Some hailed Newsom for staying measured. Others said he got dismantled in real time. And Karoline? She walked off stage without saying another word. As she passed a producer backstage, he whispered, "You're trending in 4 countries." "I didn't do it to trend," she replied. He raised an eyebrow. "But you knew you would." Meanwhile, Gavin Newsom sat alone in his green room, jacket off, tie loosened, eyes fixed on a muted screen playing the debate back on loop. His chief of staff stood nearby, awkward, unsure of whether to speak. "She didn't beat me," Gavin muttered. "She just yelled louder." "She framed you," the staffer corrected gently. "That's worse." Back on social media, the clips weren't going away. They were evolving. Commentators layered Karoline's lines with dramatic music. One edit cut Newsom's reaction to slow motion with the caption, "When the prep school playbook doesn't work anymore." That line, suits, smirks, slogans, became a rallying cry. A meme. A movement. And by midnight, it was clear, this wasn't just a debate gone viral. This was a shift in tone, nationwide. And the next time Gavin Newsom stepped on stage, the rules would be different. Because now, there was someone who'd rewritten them, in real time. 2 hours later, the debate was over, but the conversation had only just begun. Karoline stood in a quiet dressing room, the only sound being the faint buzz of her phone lighting up with endless notifications. Her team was down the hall fielding interview requests, podcast invitations, and, oddly, endorsement inquiries. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, then at the words trending on screen, "Karoline unleashed, the suit crumbled, not your political Barbie." There was a knock. A young assistant from the network poked in. "You broke the record. Highest debate viewership since 2016. They're already talking spin-off coverage." Karoline didn't smile. "That's not the win I'm after." Meanwhile, in another part of the building, Gavin Newsom sat surrounded by advisors. He was reviewing the footage, again. Frame by frame. Line by line. "She didn't answer policy," one aide argued. "She just framed everything emotionally." "That's the game now," another said quietly. "She didn't need policy. She brought a mirror." Gavin leaned back in his chair. "We underestimated her. She made you look dated," someone muttered. Back outside, protesters and fans had gathered, chanting, debating, live streaming. The entire plaza looked like a political street festival, with signs like, "Truth doesn't wear a tie," and "Karoline 2028. Reporters swarmed. One asked a viewer, "Why did tonight hit different?" The man shrugged. "Because she didn't speak like a politician. She spoke like someone finally saying what half the country's been choking on." Back in the studio, Karoline grabbed her coat. One last glance at the monitor showed Newsom, still seated, still watching. She didn't flinch. She just whispered to herself, "Let them spin it. The truth doesn't need help." She walked out alone. But not unnoticed. Not anymore. By morning, the divide was carved deep. Karoline Leavitt had gone from a rising conservative figure to a household name, loved, loathed, but impossible to ignore. Breakfast shows played her takedown of Newsom on repeat. Political podcasts unpacked her every word. Even late-night hosts, ironically, tiptoed around the fallout. Gavin Newsom, once the confident liberal voice in rooms full of applause, now faced a new reality: silence didn't win debates anymore. And charm couldn't cover every crack. Headlines shouted. The night politics changed channels. Karoline didn't just debate, she disrupted. Newsom outpaced by pure fire. Behind the scenes, Karoline's team received inquiries from national donors and grassroots organizers alike. One text reads simply: "You lit a fuse. Let it burn." At a private event that evening, Karoline took the podium again, this time to speak to supporters. Her tone was measured, calm, but sharp. This moment wasn't about left or right, she said. It was about real versus rehearsed. About having the courage to say what too many are too afraid to. "I didn't show up to play their game, I showed up to end it." The room stood in thunderous applause. Meanwhile, Gavin Newsom released a carefully worded statement. It read, "Last night was spirited, as democracy should be. I remain committed to civil discourse, even when met with provocation." The internet didn't buy it. Memes with "civil discourse" stamped over images of Karoline's takedown flooded every platform. By the end of the week, new polls showed a sharp spike in Karoline's national recognition and support. Whether they loved her or feared her, one thing was certain. She had arrived. Not as a guest, but as a reckoning. "They told me to wait my turn. To soften my words. To be grateful for the crumbs. But I didn't come here to wait. I came to speak. Loudly. Clearly. And unapologetically. So if you're uncomfortable now, ask yourself, why does the truth sting more than a lie ever did? What you witnessed here today wasn't just a debate, it was a clash of principles. When Governor Newsom called me a savage, he wasn't insulting me, he was exposing his fear of women who won't stay quiet. I'm not here for headlines or applause. I'm here because I believe this country is worth fighting for. And I won't apologize for being direct, passionate, or unshaken in the face of elitist mockery. This isn't a game to me. It's not about sound bites or studio lights, it's about the working families being crushed by failed policies, the silenced voices in our institutions, and the young women told to sit down and smile. So no, I won't sit down. And I won't smile to make powerful men more comfortable. I will stand, I will speak, and I will not flinch. Not for Newsom. Not for anyone. Because courage doesn't wear a tailored suit. It shows up when it's inconvenient. And tonight, it showed up right here.